The clinking of silverware against porcelain was the only sound Liam allowed himself to focus on. It was a clean, sharp sound in the otherwise suffocating atmosphere of the dinner party. Their apartment, a space Clara had meticulously designed to scream aspirational wealth, felt smaller tonight, the low ambient lighting casting long, judgmental shadows. Across the polished oak table, Marcus was holding court, his voice a booming baritone that consumed all available oxygen. He was telling a story about a hostile takeover his law firm had just orchestrated, punctuating the tale with dismissive hand gestures and a self-satisfied smirk. His wife, Isabella, a woman sculpted by Pilates in privilege, laughed at all the right moments, her diamonds catching the light like tiny, cold stars. And then there was Clara, Liam's wife. She was radiant, her face a perfect mask of hostess charm, but her eyes, whenever they flickered toward Liam, held a familiar glint of disappointment. He was the silent, unremarkable anchor tethering her soaring social balloon. He had chosen a simple, dark gray sweater for the evening, a stark contrast to Marcus's tailored blazer. It was a choice he knew would be interpreted not as quiet confidence, but as a lack of effort, a lack of ambition. The deal was worth north of $200 million, Marcus concluded, leaning back in his chair, the very picture of a modern titan. The other side never even saw us coming. They were completely outmaneuvered. Amateurs. That's just brilliant, Marcus, Clara said, her voice dripping with admiration. It's that kind of strategic thinking that separates the winners from everyone else. Her gaze swept past Liam, a subtle but deeply intentional dismissal. Isabella took a delicate sip of her wine. It's all about creating value, isn't it? Knowing your worth and projecting it. We were just saying the other day, Clara, that your new marketing campaign for Sentinel Corp is genius. You've single-handedly boosted their quarterly projections. I do my best, Clara said, a practiced, humble shrug that fooled no one. Someone has to be the architect of our future. The word "our" was a performance. It was meant to include Liam, but the tone excluded him entirely. It was a pronoun of possession, not partnership. Liam remained silent, slowly cutting a piece of his filet mignon. He could feel their collective gaze settle on him, the unspoken question hanging in the air. And what do you do? Marcus, never one for subtlety, decided to voice it. So Liam, he began, his tone oozing condescension. Still plugging away at that freelance consulting thing? Finding any big fish in that little pond of yours? Before Liam could offer his usual placid, non-committal response, Clara laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was sharp, brittle, and full of a frustration she no longer bothered to conceal. "Oh, Marcus, don't bother," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Liam is, he's on a different track. He handles the domestic portfolio, shall we say." The insult was dressed up as a joke, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. "I make the money, he counts it." The table chuckled. It was a polite, cruel sound. Liam's jaw tightened, but his expression remained a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. He felt a familiar, cold knot forming in his stomach. It was the feeling of being erased in his own home. Isabella, emboldened by Clara's cruelty, leaned forward. "It must be difficult, though. Relying on someone else entirely, don't you ever feel, a bit powerless?" This was the moment, the point in the evening where the subtext became text, where the veiled insults were laid bare. Liam looked at his wife, waiting. He gave her an opportunity, a silent plea, to step in, to defend him, to be his partner. Clara met his gaze for a fraction of a second. He saw a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, but it was instantly extinguished by the stronger, more seductive pull of her friend's approval. She picked up her wineglass, admiring the deep red hue. "Let's be honest," she said, her voice now cool and clinical, as if discussing a disappointing stock performance. "Liam is a wonderful man. He's kind, he's gentle, but financially, he's practically useless. A rounding error in our finances. I love him, of course, but his value isn't monetary. It can't be. The words hung in the air, devastating in their casual cruelty. Financially useless. She had said it. She had finally given voice to the disdain he had seen in her eyes for years. Marcus and Isabella exchanged a look of triumphant pity. They had successfully dissected the weak link in Clara's otherwise perfect life. Liam placed his knife and fork down, aligning them perfectly on his plate. His movements were slow, deliberate. He felt a strange calm settle over him, the kind of clarity that comes after the worst has already happened. He had absorbed the insult. He had cataloged it. In his mind, he placed it alongside a dozen others, a growing list of grievances he never spoke aloud. He thought they were right. From their limited, superficial viewpoint, their assessment was perfectly logical. They saw his modest car, his simple clothes, his lack of a prestigious job title. They saw Clara's six-figure salary, her designer wardrobe, her executive position. They built their entire understanding of him on these flimsy, visible scaffolds. They thought they knew him. They thought they understood the architecture of his life, of his marriage. They didn't know that for the past 10 years, he had been the silent, invisible architect of a world so vast it would render their own fortunes, their own successes, as little more than a rounding error. They didn't know that the freelance consulting he did from his small home office involved managing a portfolio that could buy and sell Sentinel Corp 10 times over without noticing the expense. They saw a man. They did not see the foundation upon which they were all, unknowingly, standing. Within 24 hours, a single letter, delivered by a quiet courier, would arrive and tear down their comfortable reality, brick by condescending brick. I hope you're settling in, because this is a story about the difference between what things look like and what they are. If you're enjoying it so far, I'd love it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe for more stories just like this one. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Now let's get back to the quiet before the storm. The silence that followed Clara's declaration was thick with social triumph. Marcus leaned back, vindicated. Isabella looked at Liam with an expression of profound, theatrical sympathy, as if he were a sick pet. Clara, having asserted her dominance, finally felt the room's equilibrium restored to her liking. She was the provider, the powerhouse. He was the gentle, useless husband. The narrative was set. Liam took a slow, deliberate sip of water. He could taste the metallic tang of adrenaline, but he forced it down. Anger was a hot, messy emotion. It was a resource he could not afford to spend. What he felt instead was a deep, seismic disappointment. It was one thing to be misjudged by acquaintances. It was another to be publicly sacrificed by the person who had vowed to be his partner. "Well," Liam said, his voice even and calm, breaking the quiet. "That's one way to look at it." His lack of a reaction was unsettling to them. They had expected outrage or shame or a clumsy defense. His placid response was like throwing a stone into a deep well and hearing no splash. It denied them their satisfaction. Clara's smile tightened. "It's the only way to look at it, darling. It's just facts." "Is it?" Liam asked, his gaze holding hers. It was not an aggressive question, but a genuine one. He was a man who dealt in facts, in numbers, in verifiable truths. Her fact was a fiction built on a foundation of ignorance. In his jacket pocket, his fingers brushed against the worn leather cover of a small, unassuming journal. It was a simple, unadorned book, the kind one might find in any stationery store. To Clara, it was just another of Liam's odd, analog habits. She didn't know that this journal contained the access keys and handwritten notes for a financial empire built by his grandfather, a man she had met only once and dismissed as a retired, small-town history teacher. She had no idea that the man she called financially useless spent 3 hours every morning before she woke up, not just counting her money, but commanding a global network of assets so complex that the world's top financial minds were paid fortunes to help him manage it. This journal was his symbolic object, his hidden scepter. Touching it was a way of reminding himself of the vast, silent reality that existed beyond the four walls of this apartment, beyond the petty judgments of these small-minded people. The rest of the dinner was a blur of polite conversation that Liam observed from a great distance. He felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe, noting their rituals, their social hierarchies, their strange, self-important gods of wealth and status. He answered their questions with courteous monosyllables. He smiled when it was appropriate. He played the part of the diminished husband to perfection because he knew it was what they needed him to be. It was the only role they could comprehend. Later, after Marcus and Isabella had finally departed in a cloud of expensive perfume and self-congratulation, the apartment fell silent. Clara began clearing the table, her movements sharp and agitated. She was annoyed by his silence, by his refusal to give her the emotional reaction she craved. "You could at least try to engage, Liam," she said, snatching his plate. "They're my most important clients. Marcus is on the board of 3 different companies I need to impress." "I was perfectly polite," Liam responded, his voice still unnervingly level. "Polite isn't enough. You just sat there, like a lump. While they were talking about their successes, about building something, you had nothing to say. It was embarrassing." Liam stood up and began helping her, carrying glasses to the kitchen. "What would you have liked me to say, Clara? Should I have embellished my consulting work? Should I have invented a success to make you feel more comfortable? You could have talked about the future, about your plans. Show some ambition," she retorted, turning to face him in the stark fluorescent light of the kitchen. Her face, stripped of the party's soft lighting, looked tired and hard. "My plans are progressing exactly as they should," he said softly. The statement was entirely true, but she heard it as evasion. "Oh, that's what you always say," she scoffed, turning away to load the dishwasher with furious, clattering movements. "Progressing towards what, Liam? Towards another month of me carrying this entire household on my back? Towards another dinner party where I have to apologize for my husband's lack of a real career?" She hadn't meant to say the last part aloud. It slipped out, a raw and ugly truth. She froze, her back still to him. Liam stopped what he was doing. He looked at her rigid shoulders, at the tension in her neck. The disappointment he'd felt earlier had now cooled into a kind of somber resignation. The chasm between them had been growing for years, and tonight it had become a canyon. "You apologize for me?" he asked. The question was quiet, but it filled the entire room. She didn't turn around. "It's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" he pressed, not out of anger, but a need for the unvarnished truth. "When you are with your friends, your colleagues, your family, you apologize for being married to me?" Finally, she turned. There were tears welling in her eyes, but they were tears of frustration, not remorse. "They don't understand you, Liam. They don't understand our arrangement." "Our arrangement," he repeated the words, letting them hang in the air. "The arrangement where you are the successful one, and I am the financial burden. The arrangement where you call me useless in front of guests in our home." "I was exaggerating for effect," she cried. "It was just talk, locker room talk. It was in our dining room, Clara, and you weren't celebrating me. You were belittling me to elevate yourself. There's a difference." He walked past her and out of the kitchen, the conversation over. He knew there was nothing more to say. The lines had been drawn. He went into his small office, the room she called his hobby room, and closed the door. He sat down at his simple wooden desk, the only piece of furniture in the apartment he had chosen himself. He opened the leather journal. Inside, the pages were filled with his grandfather's elegant, looping script and his own neat, blocky annotations. It wasn't just numbers and codes. It was a legacy of philosophy. "True strength is never loud," his grandfather had written on the first page. "It is the foundation, the bedrock. Let others build their temporary houses of sticks and straw upon it. The wind will always come, and the bedrock will remain. Liam traced the words with his finger. For years, he had lived by that code. He had allowed Clara her house of sticks. He had been patient, hoping she would one day see the bedrock beneath her feet. But tonight, she hadn't just ignored the foundation. She had tried to chip away at it, and she had done it with a smile on her face. He turned on his computer. The screen glowed to life, showing not a simple word processor, but a complex, multi-layered dashboard displaying the real-time performance of Crestwood Holdings. It was a symphony of numbers, charts, and global market data that would have given Marcus a fatal aneurysm. He navigated to a secure, encrypted email server. There was a message waiting for him from Arthur Vance, the 60-year-old CEO of Crestwood and his grandfather's most trusted friend. The subject line was simple: tomorrow. The body of the email was even simpler. The final documents will be delivered by courier at 11 a.m. As per your grandfather's will, upon your signature, all probationary clauses are lifted. Full and absolute control will be yours. Are you ready, son? Liam looked around the small, quiet office. He thought of Clara's angry, tear-streaked face. He thought of Marcus's smug grin. He thought of the phrase, financially useless. He typed a single-word reply: ready. The days leading up to the dinner party had been a masterclass in escalating humiliation, each instance a small, sharp cut that Liam had quietly endured. 2 weeks prior, Clara had announced she was booking their annual vacation, a trip to a lavish resort in the Maldives. She'd spread glossy brochures across the glass coffee table, a sea of turquoise water and overwater bungalows. "I've booked the Grand Sunset Villa for us," she had declared, not asked. "It's breathtaking, and I've invited Marcus and Isabella. It will be a fantastic networking opportunity." Liam, looking over the brochure, had noted the price list. The villa she had chosen cost more for a week than his visible, declared income for an entire year. "Clara, that's incredibly expensive." She had sighed, a long, weary exhalation that was designed to communicate the immense burden she carried. "Liam, please don't start. I can afford it. It's my money. Think of it as my treat." Her tone made the word treat sound like charity. "That's not the point," he'd said calmly. "We're a partnership. Decisions like this should be made together." "A partnership implies equal contribution," she had retorted, the barbs slipping out with practiced ease. "When your consulting business starts pulling in 7 figures, you can have a say in our vacation destinations. Until then, please just let me handle it. I've already had to book Marcus and Isabella a slightly smaller villa. It was mortifying. I had to tell them we were on a bit of a budget." The implication was clear. He was the budget. He was the reason she had been mortified in front of her friends. He had said nothing more, retreating into a silence that she took for acquiescence. She had no way of knowing that he owned a controlling interest in the hotel chain that owned that very resort. He could have had the entire island cleared for their private use with a single phone call. But he remained silent, observing, cataloging. Then there was the incident at the art gallery a week later. Isabella had dragged them to the opening of a trendy new abstract artist. The gallery was a stark, white space filled with people dressed in black, all speaking in hushed, reverent tones. Marcus, ever the expert, was pontificating in front of a large canvas that was, to Liam's eye, a chaotic mess of splattered red paint. "You see," Marcus explained to a rapt audience of socialites, "the artist is exploring the inherent violence of late-stage capitalism. It's a visceral, aggressive statement on consumer culture." Liam, standing at the edge of the group, had remained quiet. He found the piece technically amateurish and emotionally hollow. He preferred the quiet dignity of the Dutch masters, the profound humanity in a Rembrandt portrait. Isabella noticed his silence. "What do you think, Liam? Is it speaking to you?" Her question was a trap, and they all knew it. "It's very red," Liam had offered, a neutral, factual observation. A ripple of condescending laughter went through the group. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of dominance disguised as camaraderie. Ah, Liam, always the pragmatist. Some people just don't have an eye for fine art. It requires a certain sophistication, a level of abstraction that not everyone is comfortable with. Clara, standing beside Marcus, had flushed with embarrassment. Liam prefers things to be more literal, she'd said, trying to smooth over his perceived faux pas. He's not one for the abstract. Later that evening, in the car on the way home, she had exploded. Could you not have just played along? Could you not have said something intelligent? It's very red. You made us look like fools. I find the artist's work derivative of Pollock, but without the underlying mathematical chaos that made his work revolutionary, Liam had said calmly, his voice level. The use of color is bold but unsophisticated, lacking the nuance of a Rothko. And the title, Capital's Bleeding Heart, is a bit on the nose for a piece that is ultimately more decorative than profound. But I didn't think Marcus's audience was interested in a genuine critique. Clara had stared at him, dumbfounded, for a full 10 seconds. Where did you learn all that? I read, he said simply. She had shaken her head, dismissing it. Well, you should say things like that at the party, not to me in the car afterwards. It doesn't help me when you're pretending to be an idiot in public. The conversation had ended there. She didn't want him to be intelligent. She wanted him to perform intelligence in a way that reflected well on her. The distinction was crucial. She wasn't proud of who he was. She was embarrassed by who she perceived him to be. These moments, and dozens like them, had been the building blocks of their current reality. Each one was a small act of erasure, chipping away at his identity within their shared life until all that was left was the caricature she had created. The kind, simple, financially useless husband. And all the while, Liam had continued his other life in secret. His home office was his sanctuary. To Clara, it was a room filled with old books and a computer he used for puttering around. She never looked closely at the books. First editions on economic theory, treatises on geopolitical finance, biographies of the world's most formidable industrialists. She never looked closely at his computer screen, which was always angled away from the door. If she had, she wouldn't have seen a simple spreadsheet for a small business. She would have seen the nerve center of Crestwood Holdings. Crestwood was his grandfather's life's work. Jonathan Crestwood had been a prodigy, a man who had built a small manufacturing business in the 1950s into a global conglomerate with diverse interests in real estate, technology, banking, and media. But he was also a deeply private, almost reclusive man. He despised the ostentatious displays of wealth he saw in his peers. He believed that true power was silent, and that great wealth was a responsibility, not a toy. He had raised his grandson, Liam, with the same ethos after Liam's parents had died in a tragic accident when he was a boy. When Jonathan passed away 2 years ago, he had left the entirety of his fortune to Liam, but with a series of complex stipulations. For 2 years, the estate would be managed by Arthur Vance, while Liam acted as a silent chairman, learning the ropes, making decisions from the shadows. The will's most peculiar clause was what Jonathan had called the humility protocol. Liam was to live for these 2 years on a modest stipend, far below his actual means. He was to have a life that appeared, to any outside observer, to be completely ordinary. If you are to command this ship, his grandfather had written in a letter accompanying the will, you must first know what it is to be a passenger in the lowest decks. You must learn who will treat you with respect when you have nothing to offer them but your character. Wealth is a distorting lens, Liam. It will show you a world of friends, but true friendship can only be seen with the naked eye. This period will be your lens grinder. It will teach you to see the truth of people. Liam had understood. He had embraced the lesson. He had met Clara a year before his grandfather's death, when he was already living this quiet, understated life. She was brilliant, ambitious and driven, and he had fallen in love with her fire. He thought she had fallen in love with the quiet, thoughtful man he was. But over the last 2 years, as her own career had taken off, he had watched in slow-motion horror as the distorting lens of her success and his apparent lack of it had warped her perception of him. The humility protocol had worked. It had shown him the truth of his own wife. And now the protocol was ending. The 2 years were up. The final documents were on their way. The training wheels were coming off. He wasn't gleeful. He wasn't excited for revenge. He felt a profound sense of melancholy. His grandfather's lesson had been a painful one. He had found the truth, but he had lost his marriage in the process. He spent the night not sleeping, but preparing. He reviewed quarterly reports from a dozen subsidiary companies. He made a series of encrypted calls to international offices, coordinating a major acquisition in the Asian tech market that was set to close the following week. He was calm, focused, and methodical. He was the man his grandfather had raised him to be, a silent force, a bedrock. At 6 a.m., as the first hints of dawn touched the sky, he closed his laptop. He walked out of his office and into the kitchen. Clara was already there, dressed in expensive athletic wear, preparing a green smoothie before her morning run. She didn't look at him. The tension from the night before was still a palpable presence in the room. "I have a courier coming this morning," he said, his voice quiet in the still apartment. She scoffed without turning around. "Don't tell me. You finally ordered one of those get-rich-quick courses they advertise online." Liam ignored the jibe. "It's a legal matter. They'll be here at 11. I need you to be here." She finally turned, leaning against the counter, her arms crossed. "Why? Are you being sued? Did one of your clients finally realize you don't know what you're doing?" "No, Clara," he said, his patience a thin, fraying thread. "It's about my grandfather's estate, the final settlement." This gave her pause. She knew his grandfather had passed away, but Liam had been intentionally vague about the details, honoring the spirit of the will. She had assumed it was a tiny inheritance, perhaps a few $1,000s from a sentimental old man. "Oh," she said, her tone softening slightly. "Well, I hope it's something nice for you. Maybe you can finally buy a new car." She meant it to sound kind, but it was just another reminder of his perceived inadequacy. "Just be here, Clara," he said, "and I suggest you ask Marcus and Isabella to join us. Tell them it's a matter of some financial significance. Given their interest in my affairs, I'm sure they'll want to be present." Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. "Why would I do that? What is this, Liam?" "Consider it an educational seminar," he said, a cryptic smile touching his lips for the first time, "on the nature of value." He then walked back to his office, leaving her alone in the kitchen, confused and intrigued. For the first time in a long time, she had no idea what he was thinking, and it was deeply unsettling. The power dynamic for a brief, flickering moment had shifted. She didn't know why, but she felt a tremor of fear, like the vibration in the ground before an earthquake. And against her better judgment, she picked up her phone and called Marcus. The morning of the revelation was unnaturally quiet. A thick, gray blanket of cloud hung over the city, muffling the usual sounds of traffic and life. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. Liam sat in his office, the door ajar, listening to the sounds of the apartment. He heard Clara on the phone, her voice a low, urgent murmur as she spoke to Marcus, then Isabella. He could imagine the conversation. Liam was acting strangely, something about his grandfather's will. It was probably nothing, but could be amusing. They would come, of course. The chance to witness another of Liam's failures, or at best, his meager, insignificant successes, was too tempting to resist. Liam, for his part, was a picture of serene focus. He wasn't reviewing financial documents or making calls. He was reading a book of Stoic philosophy, a well-worn paperback of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He found a strange comfort in the ancient emperor's words, a resonance across the centuries. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. It was a principle he intended to live by. This was not about revenge. It was about truth. At 10:30, Marcus and Isabella arrived, their expressions a carefully balanced mixture of curiosity and condescension. They were dressed in expensive weekend casuals, as if they had deigned to stop by on their way to a far more important engagement. "Clara, darling," Isabella said, air-kissing her cheek. "What's all this mystery? Has Liam finally won the lottery?" "Something like that," Clara said, forcing a light laugh. She was nervous, on edge. Liam's calm demeanor was more unnerving than any angry outburst would have been. Marcus surveyed the living room, his eyes eventually landing on Liam, who was now standing by the window, looking out at the gray sky. "Well, Liam, your wife tells us you have some big news. Don't keep us in suspense. Did you land a new client? A big one this time? Maybe someone outside your own zip code?" Liam turned from the window, his face unreadable. "Something like that," he echoed Clara's words. "Please, have a seat. The courier should be here any moment." They sat, Clara perching on the edge of the sofa, as if ready to bolt, Marcus and Isabella sinking into the plush armchairs with an air of entitlement, as if they were presiding judges. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken expectations. They were a tribunal, and Liam was the defendant, though the nature of the charge was still unclear. Liam remained standing, a silent, solitary figure against the pale light of the window. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were watching a play he had written long ago, the actors finally taking their places for the final, pivotal scene. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times, but he felt no anxiety, only a quiet resolve. The quiet before the storm was almost over. At precisely 11 o'clock, the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, almost violent in the silent apartment. "I'll get it," Liam said, his voice calm and steady. He walked to the door, his steps measured and unhurried. He could feel their eyes on his back. He opened the door to find a man in a crisp, professional uniform, holding a heavy, reinforced document box. The man's name tag read, "Global Secure Logistics." This was not a standard postal service. "Mr. Liam Crestwood?" the courier asked, his tone formal. "Yes," Liam replied. Clara's head snapped up. Crestwood. She had forgotten. In all the years she had known him, he had always just been Liam Thorne, using his mother's surname. He had told her once, long ago, that his father's side of the family was complicated, and she had never pressed the issue, content to believe it was a story of mediocrity he was ashamed of. The courier handed him a digital scanner. "I need your signature and a thumbprint, sir." Liam signed the screen with a stylus, then pressed his thumb against the glowing glass pad. It beeped, a green light flashing. The courier nodded, handed him the box, and departed without another word. Liam closed the door and turned, holding the heavy box. It was sealed with thick, tamper-proof tape bearing the logo of a prestigious law firm, Vance, Aldrin, and Finch. He walked back into the living room and placed the box on the polished surface of the coffee table. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. Marcus leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Vance, Aldrin, and Finch? That's Arthur Vance's firm. They're heavy hitters, top of the food chain. What business could you possibly have with them?" "Arthur Vance was my grandfather's closest friend and executor of his estate," Liam said simply, taking a small silver letter opener from a nearby desk drawer. Clara stared at the box, then at Liam, a dawning confusion on her face. "Liam, what is going on? What is in that box?" "The truth," Liam said softly. He began to slice through the thick tape with precise, careful movements. The sound of the blades slicing the reinforced paper was the only noise in the room. Each cut seemed to heighten the tension, drawing it tighter, like the string of a bow. Inside the box, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a single, thick envelope made of heavy, cream-colored parchment, sealed with a deep blue wax seal bearing an intricate crest, a stylized C intertwined with an oak tree. Liam lifted the envelope from the box. He held it for a moment, the physical manifestation of his entire hidden life. This was it, the key, the catalyst. "Is that it?" Isabella asked, her voice tinged with disappointment. "A letter? I was expecting gold bars." She laughed, a short, nervous titter. Liam didn't smile. He looked directly at Clara. "My grandfather was a man who believed in legacy, Clara. He believed that a person's true worth wasn't in what they owned, but in what they built. And more importantly, in the character of the person they entrusted to carry it on." He broke the wax seal with his thumb. The crack was sharp, final. He unfolded the single sheet of paper within and began to read it to himself, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. The room was utterly still. Clara, Marcus, and Isabella watched his face, trying to decipher his expression. But there was nothing to decipher. He remained a placid, unreadable mask. He read for a full minute, though it felt like an eternity. Then he refolded the letter, placed it back on the table, and looked up. His gaze was not angry or triumphant. It was clear, calm, and weighted with a sadness that was more unsettling than any rage. "Well?" Clara prompted, her voice barely a whisper. "What does it say?" Liam took a breath. The quiet before the storm was over. The first drops of rain were beginning to fall. "It says," Liam began, his voice maintaining its unnerving calm, "that as of 11:02 a.m. this morning, the 2-year probationary period stipulated in the last will and testament of my grandfather, Jonathan Crestwood, has officially concluded." He paused, letting the name hang in the air again. Crestwood. It was a name Marcus, the corporate lawyer, would surely know. Liam watched a flicker of recognition, then dismissal, cross Marcus's face. There were many Crestwoods. It had to be a coincidence. "The letter serves as the final confirmation," Liam continued, his eyes fixed on Clara, "that I, Liam Crestwood Thorne, am now assuming full, unconditional, and sole executive control of all assets, holdings, and subsidiary companies of the Crestwood Holdings Group." The name landed in the center of the room like a grenade, but it was a quiet bomb. The pin had been pulled, but the explosion was not instantaneous. It was a slow-motion detonation, traveling from Liam's lips to their ears, through the complex wiring of their brains as they struggled to process the information. Crestwood Holdings Group. Isabella and Clara looked blank. The name meant nothing to them. But Marcus froze. The smug, condescending smirk evaporated from his face, replaced by a slack-jawed pallor. His mind, a finely tuned machine for recognizing power and money, was frantically connecting the dots. Crestwood Holdings wasn't just a company, it was a leviathan, a private, almost mythical entity in the financial world, known for its silent, massive influence across dozens of sectors. It was a ghost that owned everything. "Crestwood Holdings?" Marcus stammered, his voice a dry croak. That's not possible. They're a global giant. They're owned by... Nobody knows who owns them. It's a private family trust." "It was," Liam corrected him gently. "It was a trust, managed by a board on my behalf for the last 2 years. As of this morning, the trust has been dissolved, and the ownership has been consolidated. To me." Clara stared at him, her mind reeling, refusing to accept what she was hearing. "Liam, this is insane. You're a freelance consultant. Your office is the size of a closet. What are you talking about?" Liam turned his calm, patient gaze to her. This was the moment for the moral mirror, the moment to reflect her own words back at her. "You said it yourself last night, Clara. I'm financially useless. A rounding error. I've been living on a stipend for 2 years. A stipend that my grandfather set up to see what kind of life I would build and what kind of people I would surround myself with when I had nothing to offer but myself." His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. The vacation, the art gallery, the dinner party, every moment of humiliation, every condescending remark flashed through her mind, now recontextualized in this horrifying new light. Isabella, still catching up, let out a nervous laugh. This is a joke, right? A very elaborate, very strange joke? Liam, did you hire actors? Is this a prank show? Liam ignored her. He continued to speak to Clara, his voice soft but devastating. You work for Sentinel Corp, don't you, Clara? A senior marketing executive. You're very proud of your position there. Yes, she whispered, her throat tight. Crestwood Holdings acquired a majority stake in Sentinel Corp's parent company, Omni Global, 18 months ago, Liam stated, as if discussing the weather. The acquisition was handled by one of my subsidiary teams in Zurich. I signed the final directive myself from my hobby room. So you see, Clara, in a way, you've been working for me for over a year. Clara's face went ashen. She looked as if she might faint. She sank back into the sofa, her hands trembling. Then Liam turned his attention to Marcus. The lawyer, who had been frozen in a state of shock, now looked like a cornered animal. And you, Marcus, Liam said, his tone shifting from sad to clinical. Your firm, Dalton, Bryce, and Sterling, you're very proud of your new offices in the Sentinel Tower, aren't you? A 20-year lease, I believe. A flagship location. Marcus swallowed hard, unable to speak. Crestwood Realty is the primary lien holder on that building, Liam said, the quiet statement landing like a judge's sentence. Your firm pays its rent to a company that I own. I was reviewing your lease agreement last week. There are some interesting clauses regarding tenant conduct. I'm sure you, as a lawyer, can appreciate the importance of upholding the terms of an agreement. The veiled threat was unmistakable. Marcus's face, which had been pale, now flushed a deep, mottled red. The titan of industry, the master of the universe, had been reduced to a mere tenant, subject to the whims of the man he had mocked just last night. Finally, Liam's gaze fell upon Isabella. She flinched as if he were about to strike her. Isabella, he said, and her name itself seemed to make her shrink. You're on the board of the Contemporary Arts Foundation, are you not? The one that funds the gallery we visited last week? Yes, she breathed. One of Crestwood's philanthropic arms is the largest single donor to that foundation, Liam said. I was considering doubling our contribution this year to foster new artistic talent, but I've become concerned about the quality of the curation, the focus on shock value over substance. I may need to reassess our philanthropic strategy, perhaps direct the funds to institutions with a more sophisticated appreciation for art. He used Marcus's own word, sophistication, and turned it into a weapon, a scalpel that surgically dismantled her social standing. In the space of 3 minutes, Liam had not just revealed his wealth, he had systematically taken control of every pillar of their perceived success. Her job, his office, her social position. He had shown them that the world they thought they dominated was in fact a small, furnished room in his mansion. The quiet bomb had detonated, and the fallout was just beginning. The room was shrouded in a thick, choking silence, the air heavy with the dust of their shattered realities. The silence stretched, thick and unbreathable. It was the sound of 3 lives being irrevocably altered. Clara was the first to break, a strangled sob escaping her lips. It wasn't a sound of remorse, not yet. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated shock, the cry of a person watching their entire world burn to the ground. She stared at Liam, but she wasn't seeing her husband. She was seeing a stranger, a figure of immense and terrifying power who happened to be wearing her husband's face. I don't understand, she whispered, the words tumbling out. Why? Why would you do this? Why would you hide this from me? Liam's expression softened, the clinical precision of his revelations giving way to the deep, resonant sadness he had felt all along. This was the part he had dreaded, The confrontation not with their arrogance, but with her broken trust. "I didn't hide it from you, Clara. I lived it with you," he said, his voice imbued with a weary patience. "I was bound by my grandfather's will, by his final lesson for me. He wanted me to learn who I could trust. He wanted me to build a life based on character, not currency. I thought that's what we were doing. I thought you fell in love with me, Liam Thorne, the quiet man who read books and made you laugh. I didn't know that your love was conditional. I didn't know it was contingent on my out-earning you." He then began the quiet cataloging of grievances, not as accusations, but as statements of fact. "When you dismissed my work as a hobby, I said nothing. When you made jokes at my expense about who paid the bills, I endured it. When you booked a vacation and called my contribution the budget, I absorbed it. And last night in our home, you called me useless. You stripped me of my dignity for the entertainment of these people." He gestured toward Marcus and Isabella, who both flinched. "All I ever wanted was your respect, Clara. The respect you give freely to men like Marcus, based on the size of their bank accounts. I just wanted you to see me." Marcus, seeing his entire professional life flashing before his eyes, decided on a strategy of groveling. The arrogant titan was gone, replaced by a desperate sycophant. "Liam, Mr. Crestwood," he began, standing up, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Listen, last night it was unforgivable. The wine, the conversation, we were out of line, completely. I can't apologize enough. I am so sorry. I had no idea." "That's the point, Marcus," Liam said, his voice turning cold again. "You had no idea. You judged a man based on the sweater he wore. You showed him respect, or lack thereof, based on his perceived net worth. Your apology isn't for what you did, it's for who you did it to, and that makes it worthless." Isabella, seeing Marcus's approach fail, tried another tactic: feigned friendship. "Liam, we've known you for years. We consider you a friend. We were just teasing. That's what friends do. We're so thrilled for you, truly. This is incredible news." Her voice was high-pitched and frantic. "Are we friends, Isabella?" Liam asked, his question a silken dagger. "Friends don't systematically humiliate one another for sport. Friends don't sneer at a person's intellect because they offer a simple opinion on a piece of art. You weren't teasing me. You were using me as a stepping stone to make yourselves feel taller. Now you've discovered the stone you were standing on was actually the peak of a mountain, and you're afraid of the fall." His words silenced them again. The moral mirror he held up was flawless, reflecting their own ugliness back at them with perfect, brutal clarity. There was no defense against the truth. Clara finally found her voice again, this time laced with a dawning, frantic panic. Okay, I get it. I was horrible. I was a terrible wife. I said awful things. I am sorry, Liam. Truly, I am so sorry. We can fix this. We can fix this. We're a team, you and me. We can move past this." She stood up, taking a tentative step toward him, her hand outstretched. Liam looked at her outstretched hand, then back at her face. He saw the desperation there, the terror of losing not him, but the life he now represented. "A team?" he asked, the question heavy with the weight of years of disappointment. "Was it teamwork when you sided with them against me? Was it teamwork when you apologized to your colleagues for my lack of a real career? You talk about a team now, Clara, when my name is on the lease of this building, when my company signs your paycheck. But where was the team when I was just Liam, the man who loved you?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet, devastating truth of his words did more damage than any shout ever could. He took a step back, away from her hand. "I need some time to think, Clara," he said. "I need to be alone." He looked at Marcus and Isabella, his expression leaving no room for argument. "I think it's time for you both to leave." Marcus and Isabella practically scrambled over each other to get to the door. They mumbled incoherent apologies as they fled, not even daring to make eye contact with Liam. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving Liam and Clara alone in the wreckage. Clara sank back onto the sofa, covering her face with her hands. Her body shook with convulsive sobs. The performance was over. The guests were gone. All that remained was the stark, unbearable reality. She had traded a diamond for a handful of shiny pebbles, and she hadn't even realized it until it was too late. Liam watched her for a long moment, a storm of conflicting emotions warring within him. Pity, anger, profound sadness, and the ghost of the love he had once felt for her. He walked over to the coffee table and picked up the thick parchment letter. He didn't look at Clara again. "I'll be staying at a hotel for a few days," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "My lawyer will be in touch regarding everything." He then walked into his office, the hobby room, and closed the door, leaving Clara alone in the vast, silent living room that was no longer hers. The silence was no longer pregnant with tension. It was a vacuum, empty and absolute. It was the sound of the end. The days that followed were a study in consequences. The ripples of Liam's revelation spread quickly through their rarefied social and professional circles. Power, like water, always finds its level, and the landscape of their world had been seismically realigned. For Marcus, the fallout was swift and brutal. 2 days after the confrontation, he was called into a meeting with the senior partners of his law firm. The mood was glacial. Mr. Dalton, the firm's patriarch, a man whose corner office overlooked the very plaza Liam's company now controlled, did not mince words. "We've received a notice of lease review from Crestwood Realty," Dalton began, his voice like gravel. "They're exercising a moral turpitude clause. Section 14, subsection B. It seems an executive of the Crestwood Holdings Group was disrespected by a senior partner of this firm in his own home." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. It was a misunderstanding, a private dinner party. "There is no such thing as private when you're dealing with men like Liam Crestwood," another partner chimed in, his face grim. "We've also had 3 of our largest clients with ties to Crestwood's banking division, put their accounts under review this morning. The message is not subtle, Marcus." "I can fix this. I can apologize," Marcus pleaded. Dalton shook his head slowly. "The time for apologies has passed. You didn't just insult a man, Marcus. You insulted our landlord, our biggest indirect client, and one of the most powerful, invisible forces in the global economy. You made this firm vulnerable. Your arrogance has become a liability we can no longer afford." The conclusion was unspoken, but absolute. By the end of the day, Marcus was clearing out his desk, his career in ruins. He had flown too close to the sun, and the man he thought was a flickering candle turned out to be the star itself. Isabella's downfall was less financial, but no less devastating. Her currency was social capital, and she was now bankrupt. The story of Liam's revelation, likely embellished by a terrified Marcus, had ripped through their social set. She was no longer seen as a sophisticated tastemaker. She was the fool who had mocked a billionaire. Invitations to exclusive events dried up. Her calls to fellow board members at the Arts Foundation went unreturned. A week later, she received a polite, formal letter requesting her resignation from the board, citing the need for a new curatorial direction. Her carefully constructed world of influence and prestige had evaporated overnight. She was a ghost at the feast, a walking reminder of the perils of misjudging the quiet man in the corner. But the most profound consequences were reserved for Clara. She remained in the apartment, a gilded cage that now felt like a prison. Every object she looked at, the expensive sofa, the designer lamp, the state-of-the-art kitchen, was a testament to her failure. She had taken credit for a life she hadn't built, and in doing so, had proven herself unworthy of it. She went to work at Sentinel Corp the Monday after the revelation, dreading what she would find. The atmosphere was different. The usual morning pleasantries were strained. People looked at her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The news had filtered down. No one knew the details, only the shocking headline. Clara's useless husband was the secret owner of the entire company. Her authority, which had been built on a foundation of perceived success and power, was gone. She was no longer a feared and respected executive. She was the butt of a cosmic joke. Her boss, the CEO of Sentinel, called her into his office. He looked deeply uncomfortable. "Clara," he began, avoiding her eyes. "I had a call from Arthur Vance this morning." Clara's stomach plummeted. Arthur Vance, the CEO of Crestwood, Liam's man. "He was very clear," her boss continued, sweating slightly. "He said that Mr. Crestwood has full faith in the professional staff at Sentinel Corp and has no plans for any executive changes at this time." A wave of relief washed over Clara. She wasn't being fired. "However," he added, and her relief vanished, "Mr. Vance also communicated that Mr. Crestwood believes that all professional relationships should be free from personal conflict. He has requested that you be reassigned to a role where you have no direct contact with our parent company or its primary holdings." The message was clear. She was being sidelined, demoted in all but name. She was being moved from the center of power to the periphery, a ghost within her own company. It was a perfectly executed, bloodless coup. Liam hadn't fired her. That would have been messy, personal. Instead, he had simply moved her. He had rendered her irrelevant with the same quiet, devastating precision he had used to dismantle Marcus and Isabella. That night, alone in the silent, cavernous apartment, Clara finally broke down completely. The shock and panic gave way to a wave of genuine, soul-crushing remorse. She replayed years of memories in her mind, but this time through a new lens. She saw Liam's patience not as weakness, but as strength. His silence not as emptiness, but as observation. His simple request for partnership not as a challenge to her authority, but as a genuine plea for connection. She had been so blinded by her own ambition, so desperate to prove her worth to a world that measured it in dollars and titles, that she had failed to see the quiet, immense value of the man right in front of her. He had offered her the unconditional love of Liam Thorne, and she had rejected it because he didn't look like Liam Crestwood. The realization was the most profound humiliation of all, far greater than any professional demotion or social shunning. She had failed the one test that truly mattered. A week after the revelation, a slim envelope arrived for her. It was not from a lawyer. The return address was a suite at the city's most exclusive hotel. The handwriting was Liam's. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a single keycard and a note with 2 words written in his neat, familiar script. "Let's talk." The meeting took place in the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons, a space so opulent it made their apartment look like a college dorm. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a city that Clara now understood Liam effectively owned. He was standing by the window when she entered, wearing not a suit, but a simple pair of jeans and the same gray sweater he had worn at the dinner party. It was a deliberate choice, a message that he was still the same man. "Liam," she began, her voice small, fragile. He turned to face her. His expression was not angry or cold. It was tired and deeply sad. "Clara, thank you for coming." There were no lawyers, no assistants, just the 2 of them, surrounded by the silent, imposing evidence of his power. This was not a negotiation. It was a final reckoning. "I got the papers from your lawyer," she said, clutching her purse. "They're very generous." He had offered her a settlement that would allow her to live comfortably for the rest of her life. No questions asked. A clean break. "It's just money," he said, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. The same phrase she had once used to describe her own salary, now deployed with an entirely different meaning. "Why did you ask me here, Liam?" she asked, her voice trembling. "To sign them? To say goodbye in person?" "No," he said, walking slowly toward the center of the room. He gestured to one of the plush sofas. "I asked you here to ask you a question, and I need you to be completely honest, not just with me, but with yourself." She sat, perching on the edge of the cushion. He remained standing, looking down at her, not with dominance, but with a searching, analytical gaze. "For the last 5 years," he began, "you have been building a life with a man you believed to be a financial failure. You grew to resent him for it. You disrespected him for it. You were ashamed of him. Now you've discovered that man is one of the wealthiest people in the world. So my question is this, Clara. Are you in love with the man, or are you in love with the portfolio?" The question was a surgeon's scalpel, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. It was the question she had been asking herself for a week, in the lonely, sleepless hours of the night. Tears streamed down her face, silent and hot. "I don't know," she whispered, the admission a raw, painful act of self-incrimination. "God help me, Liam. I don't know anymore. When I look at you now, I see the man I fell in love with. The kind, brilliant, funny man who I pushed away. But I am so ashamed to admit that if that letter had never arrived, I don't know if I would have ever seen him again." It was the most honest thing she had said in years, and in its brutal honesty, there was a glimmer of hope. Liam nodded slowly, as if he had expected this answer. "Thank you for telling me the truth. I was a fool," she continued, the words spilling out in a torrent of guilt. "I was so insecure, so desperate to be seen as successful. I thought your lack of ambition reflected poorly on me. I didn't realize your ambition was just quieter, deeper, stronger. I measured you with a broken ruler, Liam, and I am so, so sorry." He walked over and sat in the chair opposite her. The vast, empty space of the suite between them felt like the chasm in their marriage. "I believe that you are sorry," he said, his voice gentle for the first time. "But being sorry is not the same as being changed. My grandfather taught me that wealth doesn't change who you are. It just amplifies it. It makes you more of what you already were. Your success made you more arrogant, more dismissive. My wealth, I don't want it to make me vengeful or cruel. I want it to make me more discerning, more true to the principles he taught me." He leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. "I'm not going to divorce you, Clara. Not yet. But I am not going to live with you either. The life we had is over. That apartment, that social circle, that dynamic, it was all built on a lie that we both, in our own ways, participated in." She looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if there is any chance for us, it has to be rebuilt from the bedrock up, not on wealth or status, but on respect. Mutual, unconditional respect. You need to figure out who you are without the corner office and the applause of people like Marcus and Isabella. You need to find a way to value yourself so you don't need to devalue others to feel powerful. And you need to decide if you can truly love the man who wears the gray sweater, not the man who signs the checks." He stood up, the audience concluded. "I've arranged for a smaller, comfortable apartment for you in a different part of the city, away from all this. The job at Sentinel is yours for as long as you want it, but your path forward there will be based on your merit, not my influence. In 6 months, we will talk again, and we will see if we are two people who can build something real, or if we are just two strangers who used to be married." He gave her a choice, but it was a choice that required genuine, difficult change. It was not a punishment, but a challenge, a chance for redemption, but one she would have to earn. He offered her a path back not to the wealth, but to the man. Clara nodded, wiping her tears. She understood. It was more than she deserved. It was a chance. She stood up, and for the first time, she looked at him not as a failure or a demigod, but as her husband, a man of profound integrity and quiet strength. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm with a newfound resolve. "I'll do the work, Liam. I'll earn back your respect, and I will earn back my own." She left the suite, leaving Liam alone with the panoramic view of his kingdom. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction of revenge well played. He only felt the quiet, somber weight of his grandfather's greatest lesson, that the true measure of a man's wealth is not what he has, but what he is willing to risk for the sake of his own integrity. He had risked his marriage for the truth. Now he would have to wait and see if a new, stronger one could be built upon that solid, unforgiving foundation. 3 months passed, then 6. The world settled into its new shape. Liam, stepping fully into his role as the head of Crestwood Holdings, proved to be a force unlike the financial world had ever seen. He operated not with the swashbuckling aggression of men like Marcus, but with the quiet, strategic patience of a chess grandmaster. He invested in sustainable energy, in education, in medical research. He used his immense power not to accumulate more, but to build better. He was rarely seen in public, earning a reputation as a philanthropic recluse, a modern-day Howard Hughes, but without the eccentricities. He was, as his grandfather had always intended, the silent bedrock. Clara, in her new, smaller apartment, went through a painful and transformative journey. Stripped of the external validation she had once craved, she was forced to look inward. She took the demotion at work with a humility that surprised her colleagues. She began to focus not on climbing the ladder, but on doing her job with integrity and skill. She stopped seeing a therapist to complain about her life. She started seeing one to understand it. She sold her designer clothes and her expensive car. She started reading the books Liam had left behind in the old apartment, not to impress him, but to understand him. She began to discover the woman she was, not the woman she had been pretending to be. She started to build a life she could respect. She and Liam began to talk, at first through tentative emails, then through phone calls. They didn't talk about money or business. They talked about books, about ideas, about their childhoods, about their fears. They were getting to know each other all over again, without the distorting lens of wealth and status. It was slow, fragile work, like tending to a seedling in a storm. One crisp autumn afternoon, 9 months after the revelation, Liam appeared at her apartment door, unannounced. He was holding 2 simple paper cups of coffee. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, a small, genuine smile on his face. She smiled back, a real smile, free from artifice. "Liar," she said gently. "This neighborhood is miles from anything you do." "Okay," he admitted. "I wanted to see you." She let him in. Her apartment was simple, clean, and filled with books. There was a half-finished painting on an easel in the corner, a surprisingly good landscape. "You're painting," he said, surprised. "I used to, in college," she said with a shrug. "I was afraid I wasn't good enough to make a career of it, so I went into business instead. I guess I'm not afraid of not being good enough anymore." They sat in her small living room, drinking their coffee in a comfortable silence. The chasm between them was still there, but it was no longer a gaping void. It was a valley, and they were slowly, carefully, building a bridge across it. "I saw that Sentinel stock is up 20% since you took over the marketing for the new green tech division," Liam said casually. "Your work, I presume." She blushed, a genuine flush of pride. "I had a good team, and a good product." "You had a good leader," he corrected her gently. "You did it on your own merit, Clara. You should be proud of that." She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, Liam. That means more than you know." He reached across the small space between them and took her hand. His touch was warm, familiar. "I'm proud of you, Clara." It was what she had always wanted to hear from him, but she had been listening for the wrong thing. She had wanted him to be proud of her for making money, for being a success in the world's eyes. But hearing him say he was proud of her for becoming a better person, for finding her own true worth, was infinitely more meaningful. The story of Liam and Clara doesn't end here with a perfect fairy tale reconciliation. Life is more complicated than that. Theirs is a story of a second chance, a chance to build a partnership on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. The wealth is still there, a constant presence in their lives, but it is no longer the center of their universe. It is a tool they can use, a responsibility they share, but it does not define them. Liam learned that his grandfather's lesson was not just about finding who to trust, but about becoming a man worthy of that trust. And Clara learned the hardest lesson of all, that true value can't be found on a balance sheet or in the applause of a crowd. It can only be found in the quiet integrity of your own character and in the eyes of someone who sees you and loves you for exactly who you are. So what do you think? Can a relationship truly recover from such a deep betrayal of trust? Is redemption possible, or was Clara's change only motivated by what she had lost? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below. Thank you for joining me for this story. If you found it compelling, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about the hidden truths that shape our lives. We'll see you in the next one.